Hello and welcome to video 3 for Unit 2 Cognition. This video is going to give an introduction to the memory process. At the end of this video, you should be able to answer the following question. How do the types, structures, and processes of memory work? So let's first start by talking about the biological basis for memory. This should be a review from last unit, but let's just go over it again. So first of all, the hippocampus, this is the structure that allows us to move short-term memories into long-term memory. The next structure is the frontal lobes. This is where our working memory is going to be housed, and we'll talk about working memory in just a little bit. The basal ganglia allows us those procedural memories, which should make sense because we said that the basal ganglia was part of our kinesthetic sense. And our kinesthetic sense is our agility and ability to coordinate our movements. The amygdala is involved in our emotional memory. And finally, our cerebellum is involved in our implicit memory, those things we no longer have to think about. So let's talk about the different systems of memory. There are 3 systems you need to know about. The first is sensory memory. Sensory memory holds an exact copy of incoming information for just a few seconds. Sometimes this can be as short as a half a second long. We have 2 different types of sensory memory. Echoic memory, which is our auditory sensory memory, and our iconic memory, which is our visual sensory memory. You can test your iconic memory by closing your eyes, and you'll be able to very quickly see the outline of what you've been looking at. This will go away in a very short amount of time, but this is evidence of our iconic sensory memory. The next process in our memory is our short-term memory. Our short-term memory holds a very small amount of information, and it's only for a very brief amount of time. We know from research studies that our short-term memory lasts about 30 seconds, and it can hold about 7 items plus or minus 2. Our short-term memory is completely dependent upon what we are paying attention to at the time. Our short-term memory also houses what we call our working memory, and this is the actual conscious awareness of what we are doing in that moment. The next process we need to talk about is our long-term memory. Our long-term memory is seemingly unlimited, and it holds our information for long periods of time. The different types of information that can be housed are explicit memories, or the facts, like our semantic memory of ideas and concepts. So it's the vocab terms you're learning in this class. The episodic memory, or the memory of personal experiences or episodes in our life. And our flashbulb memory, which is the emotional, very vivid memories that we hold of specific events. Long-term memory also houses our implicit memories or procedural memories. These are types of memories that we no longer really have to think about. They just come automatically to us. An example of this might be playing the piano or shooting a basketball. We also have what we call prospective memory, and this is remembering things that we need to do in the future. So the process of encoding is sensing and storing information for later. We have different types of encoding that we use when putting information into long-term memory. The first is structural or visual processing, and this is remembering using visual images. Structural memory is easily forgotten, and it's the most shallow form of processing. Phonetic or acoustic processing is remembering using sound. It's deeper than visual, and it's intermediate processing. And then finally, semantic processing is remembering based on meaning. This is the deepest level of processing. So listening or watching a lecture is a lot less effective than taking meaningful notes. So structural or visual processing is just being able to picture where something is on a slide. Phonetic processing is maybe being able to remember the words that I said during the video. And semantic processing is actually being able to remember the information that I said and being able to tell me the meaning of the particular slide. The next part of memory we're going to talk about is the storing of memory. And one of the models that we have for storing memory is the multi-store model of memory, or the 3-stage process. And this model tells us that memory happens in a very distinct linear fashion. The information or input comes into our body via sensory memory. This is our sensation. If we pay attention to this sensory information, it will be in our short-term memory. In order to move that information from short-term memory into our long-term memory, we have to encode that information. And encoding requires effort. This requires rehearsal. And after we've rehearsed that information and put it into our long-term memory, in order to keep it there, we have to rehearse it, retrieve it, use it again. Otherwise, that memory will decay or we will forget it. If information in our short-term memory is not rehearsed, it will not be encoded into long-term memory. This is information maybe about who's sitting next to you on the bus or what time you actually got home that day. We've talked about this idea of long-term potentiation, the idea that if we continue to use memories or retrieve memories over and over again and use them, those memory traces become stronger and it's easier for us to retrieve that memory. So for example, if you're going to use information about a class, it's better for you to use that information over and over, doing practice problems, doing vocab, flashcards, talking about it with another person, because the more times you use that memory, the better that neural connection becomes and the easier it is for you to recall it on a test. If you don't use that memory, if you only encode the information one time, let's say in class, and you never retrieve it and use it again, that pathway will decay and eventually you'll forget that information. So our multi-store memory model states that there are different stages of our memory. The sensory memory lasts for just a few seconds, short-term memory lasts about 30 seconds, and long-term memory is seemingly unlimited as long as we retrieve and use that information. The next model of memory we need to talk about is the working memory model. And the working memory model builds off of the multi-store memory model. Basically, this model says that our short-term memory is more than just the first time we see a piece of information or the time we pay attention to it. The working memory model proposes that our short-term memory is made up of multiple components that get used in order to bring things back from our long-term memory to use in our immediate consciousness and taking new information in. The working memory model states that working memory is made up of 4 different components. The first is the central executive. The central executive acts as the CEO of our attention. This system controls and manages our attention and coordinates the use of all of the other components of working memory. The central executive then controls the other 3 systems. The visuospatial sketchpad stores and maintains visual and spatial information. This is what we call our inner eye. This is our ability to take in and use all of the visual information that is being processed. Our phonological loop, on the other hand, stores and maintains verbal information. This is our inner ear. This allows us to take in auditory information, process it, and then determine what we're going to say back. The episodic buffer was added a little bit later, and this particular system allows the interactions between short-term and long-term memory. The episodic buffer brings in information from our long-term memory of past experiences with a situation and allows us to interact with the current situation we are in. All of these systems work together in order for us to truly experience a conscious awareness in the world we live in. As we go forward for the rest of our unit, we are going to be talking about the different specific pieces of memory. We will talk about encoding and how that works, storage, retrieval, and finally forgetting.